Wow, you're here. Welcome to the channel. Welcome back if you've been here before. I'm the Mushroom. Check out this new microphone I just got. Like every YouTuber has one, but I finally got an SM7B. I'm very excited. You're probably not excited. You're probably here to watch me play the creativity mirror match because that's what the thumbnail says it was. Our opponent today is Alex Luckhart. He is playing 5-color creativity. Our lists are very close to the same. I think he is playing a Savai Triome instead of a Blood Crypt, and I think that's the only difference. If you don't know anything about what I'm talking about, you probably don't know how this deck works. Check this video out. That's going to be the how the deck works, how it's built, and how to play it video that I recorded already for you. It's at the beginning of this playlist. And if you haven't seen rounds 1 and 2 and would like to, go ahead and check those out as well. They're in the description. They're somewhere. Maybe I put them here. I probably didn't. I don't know how many cards you could put in a YouTube video. That's everything you should need to know. So without further ado, let's get into game number 1. I win the die roll, meaning that I get to be on the play, and both Alex and I have to mulligan to 6 cards. Our first 7-card hand looks like absolute garbage with 2 Teferi Time Raveler, 1 Archon of Cruelty, and 4 lands. There's simply not enough to do with this hand in the mirror, and having an Archon already makes it like a mulligan to 6. If we're going to mulligan to 6, let's at least try to mulligan to a good 6, which we have here with Leyline Binding, Arid Mesa, Spell Pierce, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Scalding Tarn, Mountain, and we're going to take a copy of Lightning Bolt and put it on the bottom because it does not do very much in the mirror match. This is a great 6. We have lands, interaction, and even a Fable. Turn 1, I'm going to play Scalding Tarn and pass to Alex, who plays Jetmir's Garden tapped and tries to pass back, but at the end of his turn, I'll fetch dropping to 19 for a tap Jetmir's Garden of my own. Then I'll play Arid Mesa and pass back to Alex, who plays Scalding Tarn, fetches and shocks for a Steam Vents, dropping to 17, and he plays Renin 6. In response, I fetch and shock for a Steam Vents of my own, dropping to 16, and cast Spell Pierce targeting Renin 6. Alex cannot pay the 2, so it gets countered, and we go to my turn, where I play a Mountain, cast Fable of the Mirror Breaker, trigger the Fable, get a Goblin Shaman, and pass back to Alex, who plays Wooded Foothills, fetches and shocks again, dropping to 14 for a second Steam Vents, casts Teferi Time Raveler, down ticks the Teferi to bounce the Goblin, and draws a card, and passes to me. At the top of my first main phase, I trigger Chapter 2 of Fable and discard Spell Pierce and Leyline Binding to draw 2 fresh cards. Then I'll cast Renin 6, tick it up to buy back my Scalding Tarn. I'll play the Tarn and pass to Alex, who ticks up his Teferi and casts Leyline Binding for the wrong mana cost. It should have cost 2 because he does not have Wooburg, he does not have any swamps, but he paid 1 thinking he did have swamp and is targeting my Renin 6. We both miss this, so it resolves. My Renin 6 gets exiled, and then at the end of his turn, I'll fetch, dropping to 15 for a tap Xander's Lounge. In my first main phase, Fable of the Mirror Breaker is going to hit its 3rd chapter and flip into Reflections of Kiki Jiki. Then I'll cast Leyline Binding for its correct mana cost, targeting Alex's Binding that's on my Renin 6 to get back my Renin 6, and then tick it up to get back my Tarn. At the end of my turn, Alex is going to fetch down to 13 for a Savai Triome tapped, then he's going to cast Lightning Bolt targeting my freshly flipped Reflections of Kiki Jiki. Alex will then tick up his Teferi, cast Expressive Iteration, he'll put a card into his hand, a card onto the bottom, and I'll exile an Arid Mesa. He'll play the Arid Mesa and cast Binding for the right cost this time, targeting my Binding on his previous Binding. His other Binding re-enters and hits my Renin 6, exiling it once again, and we go back to my turn, where I cast Teferi Time Raveler, minus the Teferi, on the Binding, exiling my Ren to get back Renin 6 once again and draw a card off of the Teferi. Then I'll minus Ren to deal 1 damage to Alex's Teferi and pass the turn. Alex is going to play Arid Mesa, cast Renin 6, minus his Renin 6 to kill my Teferi. He'll plus his own Tef and try to pass to me. At the end of his turn, I'll fetch, dropping to 14 for a Dwarven Mine, trigger the Dwarven Mine, and make a Dwarf. Then I'll fetch again for another Mine, and I forget to lose a life this time, but it doesn't wind up mattering. Luckily, I do get a second Dwarf token. In my turn, I'll head straight to combat and attack Alex's Teferi for 2 with both of my Dwarves. But before blockers, Alex is going to fetch down to 12 for a Dwarven Mine of his own and make a Dwarf. He'll block one of my Dwarves with his, so they'll trade and Teferi takes 1, dropping down to 2 loyalty. Then in my second main phase, I'll minus my Renin 6 to hit the Tef for 1, dropping it to 1, and then I'm going to cast a second Renin 6, down tick that one, and I'm going to finish off the Teferi. After that, I'll cast another Fable of the Mirror Breaker, which resolves, so I'll get a Goblin and I'll try to pass to Alex, but in response, he'll Binding my Goblin token and then fetch to 11 for a Dwarven Mine. He'll trigger the Dwarven Mine, make a Dwarf, and we'll go to his turn, where he takes up Renin 6 to buy back his Arid Mesa. He'll play the Mesa, then fetch, dropping down to 10 for a Dwarven Mine, which triggers the Dwarven Mine, and he gets a Dwarf. Then he's going to Creativity for 2, targeting both Dwarfs. This resolves, so he gets 2 Archons, and both of them trigger. In response to both triggers, I'll fetch to 13 to get another Dwarven Mine and make a Dwarf. Then I'll take 6 from both of the Archon triggers, dropping to 8. Alex will gain 6, going up to 16. I'll discard Creativity, then I'm out of cards, so I can't discard a second card. I'll sacrifice 2 Dwarves, and Alex is going to draw 2 cards. Then he'll Lightning Bolt my Renin 6, killing it, and pass the turn to me. At the beginning of my main phase, we trigger Chapter 2 of Fable of the Mirror Breaker, but the card that we drew for turn was Expressive Iteration, so we do not make any changes. I'll cast Expressive Iteration, but I do not find an answer to this insane board state, so we die, we lose, we're going to game 2. Going into game 2 against the Mirror, we have a pretty aggressive sideboard plan. We'll start by taking out 4 Lightning Bolt, 2 Prismatic Ending, 1 Leyline Binding, 1 Mountain, and 1 Spell Pierce. To replace these cards, we'll start with 4 copies of Change the Equation, a card you'll notice I sideboard in a lot versus various matchups in this format. The only cards that Change can't counter in the Mirror match are Teferi Time Raveler, Leyline Binding, and Archon of Cruelty, meaning Change the Equation operates a lot like actual counterspell in the Mirror. We're also siding in 3 copies of Hollow Moonlight in order to blink Alex's creativities and stifle triggers from Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Dwarven Mine. Moonlight also has the hidden text of not caring about Veil of Summer, another card we're siding in a single copy of in order to fight opposing Archon triggers and permission. Finally, we'll bring in 1 copy of Besiju. This is going to be very good at fighting Alex's Leyline Bindings, and if we're able to get a Red and 6 into play and start to loop the Besiju with Red and 6, we'll be able to take out all of Alex's colored sources because the weak link of the creativity deck is its mana base. We lost game 1, meaning we get to be on the play for game 2, and we're keeping a 7-card hand while Alex is mulliganing to 6. Our 7-card keep has Fable of the Mirror Breaker, 2 Hollow Moonlight, 1 Veil of Summer, Scalding Tarn, Wooded Foothills, and a Leyline Binding. Turn 1, I'll play Scalding Tarn and pass the turn. Alex will play Arid Mesa and try to pass back, but at the end of his turn, I'll fetch dropping to 19 for Jetmir's Garden tapped, and we'll go to my turn where I'll play Wooded Foothills and try to pass back. At the end of my turn, Alex will fetch to 19 for a Xander's Lounge, on tap, play Scalding Tarn, he'll fetch and shock dropping to 16 for a Stomping Ground, and play Red and 6. It resolves, so he ticks it up and he gets back Scalding Tarn and tries to pass to me, but I will fetch it his end step, dropping to 18 for a Xander's Lounge of my own, and cast Leyline Binding, targeting Alex's Red and 6. I'll shock in Blood Crypt, dropping to 16, and cast Fable of the Mirror Breaker, triggering it to get a Goblin, and I'll pass to Alex, who plays Scalding Tarn, fetch and shocks down to 13 for a Teferi. He downticks the Teferi to bounce my Goblin, draws a card, and passes to me. In my first main phase, we'll trigger Chapter 2 of Fable of the Mirror Breaker, and I'll discard Hollow Moonlight to draw 1 extra card. Then I'll play Arid Mesa and cast Leyline Binding, targeting Alex's Teferi, which resolves, so we exile Teferi and pass to Alex, who just plays Jetmir's Garden tapped and passes back. I'll flip my Fable, take no actions, pass back to Alex, who plays a Wooded Foothills and passes the turn back to me. I'm going to attack Alex for 2, dropping him to 11, and try to pass back, but at the end of my turn, Alex fetches down to 10 for a tap Steam Vents. Then on taps, plays a Wooded Foothills and casts Fable of the Mirror Breaker. In response to Fable, I'll cast Hollow Moonlight to draw a card, then Fable resolves, but he does not get a Goblin thanks to the Hollow Moonlight. On my turn, I'll shock in Steam Vents, dropping to 14, and attack Alex for 2, dropping him to 8. Then I'll cast Teferi, I'll take the Teferi up and try to pass, but at the end of my turn, Alex will fetch, dropping to 7 for a Dwarven Mine. He'll trigger the Dwarven Mine, get a Dwarf, then I'll untap and cast Leyline Binding to exile my Teferi. Then he remembers his Fable's second chapter, so he pitches Arid Mesa to draw a card and passes. I'll cast Ren and 6, tick it up to get back my Scalding Tarn. I'll play Tarn, attack Alex for 2, dropping him to 5, and pass, where Alex flips his Fable to Reflections, plays Scalding Tarn, and tries to pass back to me. At the end of his turn, I fetch to 13 for a tap Sacred Foundry. Then I'll downtick Ren and 6 to kill Alex's Dwarf. I'll attack Alex for 2, dropping him to 3. Then I'll play Dwarven Mine, trigger the Dwarven Mine to make a Dwarf. I'll cast Teferi, but in response to the Teferi, Alex will cast Spell Pierce. In response to the Spell Pierce, I'll fetch, dropping to 12 for a Dwarven Mine, trigger the Dwarven Mine, and make a Dwarf. Then I'll pay 2 for the Spell Pierce. Then Alex will cast another Spell Pierce. This time the Teferi will get countered because I decide not to pay 2. At the end of turn, Alex is going to fetch, dropping to 2 for a Dwarven Mine, trigger it, get a Dwarf, and then we go to Alex's turn, where he casts Creativity for 2, targeting both of his creatures. In response to the Creativity, I cast Spell Pierce. Alex taps out to pay for the Spell Pierce. Then I'll cast Veil of Summer. After that, Alex's Creativity is going to resolve. He gets 2 Archons, but the triggers aren't able to resolve thanks to Veil giving me Hexproof. After that, I'll show Alex a Creativity in my hand. This kills him, so we win game 2. We're going to game 3. Going into the final game, we have no sideboard changes. Alex is on the play, and we're both keeping 7-card hands. Mine includes Arid Mesa, Steam Vents, Dwarven Mine, Teferi Time Raveler, Leyline Binding, Hollow Moonlight, and Expressive Iteration. Turn 1, Alex plays a Xander's Lounge tapped and passes. I'll play an Arid Mesa and pass right back. Alex plays Scalding Tarn, fetches and shocks to 17 for a Stomping Ground, plays Ren and 6, ticks up the Ren to get back Tarn, and tries to pass to me, but at the end of his turn, I'll fetch to 19 for a tapped Jetmir's Garden. Then I'll shock in Steam Vents, dropping to 17, cast Leyline Binding, hit Alex's Ren and 6, and pass. Alex plays a Scalding Tarn, and then fetches and shocks for a Sacred Foundry. He'll play Fable of the Mirror Breaker, trigger the Fable, get get a Goblin and pass to me, where I shock in Sacred Foundry, dropping to 15. I'll play Teferi Time Raveler, I'll down tick to bounce the Goblin and draw a card, and pass back to Alex. Alex triggers Chapter 2 of Fable and says no changes, which is awful news for us. Then he plays Wooded Foothills and casts Leyland Binding, targeting my Teferi. He passes, so I play Dwarven Mine, trigger the Dwarven Mine to get a dwarf, and pass the turn. In Alex's first main phase, he tries to flip Fable of the Mirrorbreaker over, but in response, I'll cast Hollow Moonlight. In response to that, Alex casts Change the Equation to counter Moonlight, and then flips Fable. He'll play Dwarven Mine, trigger the Dwarven Mine to make a dwarf, and pass the turn. I'll play Bloodstained Mire, and then put Teferi Time Raveler on the stack, but in response, Alex is going to fetch, dropping to 13, for a Steam Vents, which he shocks into play, dropping to 11, and cast Spell Pierce, targeting the Teferi. In response, I'll fetch to 14 for a Dwarven Mine, trigger the Mine to make a dwarf, and pay for the Spell Pierce. Then Teferi resolves, so I'll minus Teferi on Alex's dwarf to bounce it and draw a card, and then pass the turn. Alex will play Dwarven Mine, trigger the Dwarven Mine to make a dwarf, and then cast Creativity for 1, targeting the dwarf to get an Archon. This happens, Archon triggers, I go to 11, Alex goes up to 14, I'll sack a dwarf and pitch a Spell Pierce, Alex will draw a card. Then Alex uses Fable of the Mirrorbreaker's ability to copy the Archon, that Archon's trigger goes on the stack, I drop to 8, Alex gains 3 going to 17, and then the Archon has haste thanks to the reflections of Kiki Jiki. So he attacks, and that triggers Archon again, and this kills us because we take 3, and then 6, we lose this game. As a final note, in editing this game, I realized I probably should have played quite a bit more aggressively in these games, but on the bright side, it's another win for 5-color creativity. We're 2-1, I'll see you in round 4.